As you alluded to, one of the people in the discussion said, like, I think Squiggles could be a 1 ETH floor someday. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. Squiggles are nice, but that is never going to happen. But that kind of like changed my mindset a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, again, I don't totally get it, but these guys are smart. And so I'm going to mint some more.
Welcome to the SquiggleDAO podcast. My name is Jared, and online you can find me on Twitter at Jared_pause. I'm the founder of the 8NAP digital asset fund and generative platform 8NAP Art. I'm an avid Chromie Squiggle collector and enthusiast.
And I'm Nifty. I lead finance, acquisitions, and NFT DeFi for the DAO, and I'm another huge fan of Squiggles. Our guest today is JDH. He's not fully doxed, but he was previously an entrepreneur in the internet fintech space, having success with not only one, but two companies, and then worked at an early stage VC doing software investing. Currently, he's a member of FlamingoDAO and one of the best NFT collectors in the space. It's an honor to have him with us today. JDH, welcome to the pod.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of the pod and SquiggleDAO, and I don't know if I'm one of the best collectors in the space, but I too am an avid Chromie Squiggle fan and love to talk about them.
You may say that you're not one of the biggest, but your wallet will tell otherwise. Quite a story.
So you've had success with two companies. You were early to Bitcoin. You were early to NFTs. An amazing collection. So luck, it's completely out of the question. What are the lessons that you have learned, and what advice can you give to some of us that we are earlier in our careers?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I'll ramble a bit in response. I grew up in a middle class family, with well-educated but not wealthy parents, and I went to state university and mostly paid my own way and worked the whole time. So I was very motivated to find a path in my life where I could have independence and control over my time. And I felt, highly driven to be successful. And I guess if I look back over my career, that's manifested itself in, really spending a lot of time really trying to crack the code on how to be successful. I've always been curious about business, and I've always just paid attention, from a young age, would, go into just trying to understand how things worked in businesses. I was just really curious about it. Anyway, the long and short of that is I realized in my 20s that I wanted to work for myself. And that led to me founding my first business, and my second business. And, and that allowed me to get on this treadmill of success, of things working, because I was lucky in a lot of ways. I'm smart and worked hard, but a lot of people are smart and work hard and their first business isn't successful. My first business became successful and I made some money. It took a long while before I made a lot of money from that, but initially I did make some money and I had that success. And it really is true that, the more successful you become, the more financially independent you become, the easier it is to continue to be successful, for better or worse. I mean, it's better if you're in that position. It's obviously, not necessarily an equalizing force in society. And so, I was able to, I guess, leverage that, compounding advantages and keep investing and getting smarter. And so, as far as the key traits that I think allowed that, number one is kind of curiosity. What's worked for me is to follow my curiosity, things that interest me, be willing to operate, even though I'm primarily sort of a rationalist and a analytical thinker and a numerical thinker. I also honor my intuitive side as well, and just try and follow that curiosity and things that interest me, and sort of listen to how I feel about something, not just always reflexively hammer on the numbers. And, it's been that sort of curiosity and playing with things that that has really opened up wide opportunities for me. So that would be, I guess, my recommendation. And then over time, the other element to pair with that is a trying to maintain some like open-mindedness and a critical mindset and review what you've done and what's worked and try to evolve as a person. Try not to try and really analyze what you're doing, what's working, and change and adapt, and what other people are doing and what's working, and really improve your algorithm, your mental algorithm for what a good idea is, what a good way to live life is, what, look at successful people and see what they're doing and try and emulate it, that kind of thing. So if you kind of couple this like retaining curiosity, which is, I think, relatively easy to have curiosity when you're young, but a lot of people's drops off over time. If you could retain that curiosity, playing with things, open-mindedness, experimentation, and then pair it with always evaluating what you did, what worked, what didn't, what could do better. It's really this powerful combination that over time has allowed me to spot more and more opportunities. I guess you get this pattern recognition from all this like smarts that you've been witness to through your career, and then you try things and you figure out what works. This is kind of I realize, kind of an abstract example. So maybe I could bring it concrete with an example from earlier in my career. I'd started the first business and it was pretty successful, but I was kind of like, at some point I left the management of it and other people were managing it. I was just on the board of it. And I wanted to do another business. I was still young. I was still ambitious. I'd made a tiny bit of money, but not any real money from the first business. So, I mean, I needed a job and I wanted to work for myself. Now, I'd been playing this time. I would just play with things. And a friend of mine was an early employee at Google. And, now we're in like, 2001, 2002. So the very early days of Google. And they just launched for the first time their advertising product next to the search results. You could put ads next to it before, initially, for most of the listeners on this podcast are too young to have probably used Google in 2000. Most of the hosts of this podcast maybe are too young to have used Google in 2000. But initially it was just free, and they didn't really have a business, and it was search results. And then they were inspired by another company, Overture's Innovation, to add sort of paid search listings, next to the search content. And this combination of the best search product plus paid listings created the best money-making machine maybe in the history of the world, which is Google, which has just printed money for 20 years and pissed it away on balloons floating over Africa, offering internet and other random science projects, and still makes so much money they don't even know what to do with it. It's an incredible money-making machine that they've created. And really, at the engine of it is just simply that. It's the great search results, the paid ads next to it. Well, when this invention came about, my friend who worked there said, "Hey, check this out. It's a new innovation. You can just swipe a credit card, deposit $5 with a minimum bid of 5 cents, put an ad next to something." So I said, okay, that's, more than that's interesting. I will try that. And so I swiped my credit card, I put an ad, and I just goofed around with it, but I had $5 to waste. So I thought I opened an Amazon affiliate account. It's called an associates account. And I started bidding 5 cents on the keyword Amazon. And my ad said, books, music, and more, Amazon.com, which initially there were no restrictions on what you could advertise. My ad's over here on the right. And of course, when somebody searches for Amazon, there's a big natural search result. But for some reason, with millions of users, some people click on my ad. I would pay 5 cents and I would make about 22 cents per time on that. And with a few refinements to my search words, I made like $80,000 over the next 5 months of net profit, just running like little ads on there. And then in the whole next year, it entirely went away. They banned using trademark terms. Lots of people came in and did other ads, and it was just a fun little experiment. But fast forward 2 years from that point, again, my friend said, "Oh, there's a new product out, maybe a year and a half. It's AdSense. Google has an advertising product that will allow, if you have a website, you can show their ads next to your content instead of their search results." And then, having made $80,000 the last time this came along, I thought I would try this again. It's a little more work. I had to create a website. I'm not technical, but I figured it out. And immediately that flywheel was working too. And then that insight led me to realize that this new product would allow all these, this is now 2003, 2004. There are all these content sites that were created in the first bubble that had now been left for dead, basically, because there was no value in them. People would look at them, but people were very skeptical of the internet at this point in time. Again, hard to remember, but after the bubble, yeah, I mean, think about like people feel like your normie friends feel about crypto right now. They're like, see, I knew this whole thing was bullshit. Well, that's how everybody felt about the whole internet in, 2002, and probably how everybody would feel about AI in like 18 months from now or whatever. It's like this, everybody who didn't get it the first time and is kind of like mad because they didn't get it when things overgo and then overcorrect down. Everybody's like, see, I told you so. This was stupid. And so all these content sites were not that valuable, and we were able to buy one of them, and realizing that this advertising innovation let you really monetize users. And there were a couple other insights too. Apply that, and then had a spectacularly successful business that we're able to buy for a very modest amount of, for the price of a Fidenza, we could buy this whole business, and then and sold it, only a few years later for the price of whatever, several God mode Fidenzas. So we that's, I guess, the example I've tried to then replicate throughout, and have successfully replicated through the 15, 20 years since then, which is to stay open-minded, be curious about innovations on the frontiers of technology to the extent I can, play with those, and and follow my passions and apply all that business logic that I've developed over my career to finding great opportunities to invest or found businesses or do stuff within it. So
It
sorry, that was a
sounds like
long answer to a short question.
no, you're looking on a time horizon that is multiple cycles, and I think that at least in this space, a lot of people have been trained to have a very nearsighted profit expectations, but your curiosity paired with a longer time horizon actually feels like a really great. I mean, I want to double click on this because it's a really great baseline for a lot of the listenerships who may be younger. I mean, I was around in the early 2000s when everything crashed, and my only regret was I didn't have enough capital to deploy, because like you said, when you have that core belief in something, you start going, and it's October 2023 of this recording, and right now the sentiment in NFTs is not the greatest. But if having talked to a number of different guests, if your core conviction is still aligned with art advancing and the blockchain being a mechanism for a better distribution, we're in a great place. You talk about curiosity, but you also have been public that your first introduction to Bitcoin, not that you bought it then, was 2011. Do you
Yep.
mind sharing a little bit about your crypto journey and how that led eventually into maybe collecting some of these beautiful pieces that reside in your wallet?
Yeah. Well, so it doesn't, this is gonna uh, this is a great useful example where I just said, be curious, use your filters. And then I guess the third element is when you see opportunity, act. Don't wait around. Don't be busy with other things. Like, have a very high filter such that only once every few years does something really cross that filter. Is this the best idea for me anyway? The approach has been, is this the best idea I've had in the last few years? And if so, you need to pay a lot of attention to it. So I ran into Bitcoin, kind of in the ways that anybody does back in 2011, I guess. I don't remember it exactly. In this event, I think I read an article in a mainstream publication about Bitcoin, and I was an econ major in my undergrad, and I find the concept of money very interesting, and so and I find I've come to realize that most people aren't like this, and this is not a value judgment, but it's just like, well, maybe it is a little bit. Is that like I love hearing new ideas that challenge what I believe. There's nothing more would be more enjoyable for you to present, a case against Chromie Squiggles to me that I found compelling here. Even though I love Chromie Squiggles, I'm very pro Chromie Squiggles. That would be super interesting to me. And so I love ideas that challenge my beliefs. Because I guess I like novelty, and like there's novelty in this idea of like changing my beliefs. And so anyway, I heard about Bitcoin, and as you pointed out, my first business, which by that point had become pretty successful, was a fintech business, and not adjacent to, but not a million miles away from what Bitcoin was doing. And I was still on the board of that business, and so I went to the team and I said, "Here's this thing," and I explained what it is. You guys should consider working with this. There are ways in which that could have integrated into that business. They could have been, an early platform. Like, I think at the time, was there Mount Gox at the time? I think whatever it was, I think there might have been Mount Gox at the time, was like actually successful, and, was still obviously like quite flimsy. And I thought there was an opportunity to do what they were doing more seriously. It was extremely challenging to figure out how to buy Bitcoin in 2011. It was non-trivial to figure out how to buy Bitcoin in 2011. And, mining it might have been the easiest way to do it. And even that wasn't easy. And so anyway, that company said, no, thank you. We spent enough of our life arguing with regulators. Getting involved with unlicensed money is not a high priority for us. And, I guess as an example that my tactics don't always work perfectly, I left it there. I didn't buy Bitcoin. I didn't spend, I was curious about it, but I didn't spend a ton of time on it. I guess I didn't have the full vision of it. And then getting to another of what are my core beliefs around how I've been successful in investing. I'll offer another principle for the younger people in the market in terms of like knowing where to spend your time, knowing what to invest in. And that is, if you can find in your network a handful of people who you think are incredibly smart and incredibly thoughtful and some of the best investors in the world with good judgment like yours, they like the kind of things you like, indexing on those few people and maintaining those relationships and learning about opportunities from them has been absolutely core to my success over and over and over again. Every single time it has been. We gave that example of just a second ago of, the insights from my friend who worked at Google. There was another half of that business. There were two insights, and the other one came from someone I went to school with, who's incredibly smart. And, all along my crypto journey, this was true. And in this case, I ended up buying Bitcoin in, I think it was late 2013, approximately. And so I kind of slept on it for a couple of years there. And then a couple of people that I rated as incredibly smart independently, I think 3 people not only had said to me that they were buying Bitcoin, but they were buying a meaningful portion. These were people who were fairly wealthy and saying, anyway, I'm going to put 1% or 3% of my assets in Bitcoin, which was outlandish thing to say if you were, say, had a net worth of $100 million in 2013. To say I'm going to put $2 million in Bitcoin was bold. It was a lot more bold than it sounds right now. And so that got my attention, and I wondered what those guys were doing. Another thing I learned I'm giving away all my investment techniques, but from reading people like Stan Druckenmiller and other conventional financial investors who've been very successful, one good lesson they point out, particularly with things that are liquid, it's been a good lesson in NFTs too, is if you end up with a thesis, act on, if it's liquid and you can leave the position, act on it, buy at least a starting position, if not your full position, as you continue to do work. And then you can always sell it if you don't like it. But the flip side of that, if you wait and then price starts going up as other people figure this out, the trick is to figure out something a week to 6 months before the rest of the world figures it out, right? And you don't know how early you are when you have one of these crazy insights, but the world is pretty efficient, and you're rarely more than a few months ahead of all the other smart people. And so it's not really advisable to wait around, and this is back to where, if we want to explore why having been successful and having made some money enables future success. If you've made some money, you have some money in the bank, then this idea that you're going to act quickly and do your due diligence afterwards, and then you can always unwind the position. Maybe you'll take a little bit of a loss, call it a random walk from where you are. It's a little easier to do if you have a bit of a balance sheet. But anyway, so this came about in 2013, 14. I wouldn't say I had figured out incredible conviction around Bitcoin, but smart people around me disconnected. Several people had expressed this conviction, and that really got my attention. So I built a position, and I bought it on the way up at 700 as it went to whatever 1100 and peaked, and then it started to come down again. I bought some more around 700. I went down to $200 to $300 and stayed there for a couple of years. It wasn't obviously a good trade, but I just kind of left it there, and it primed me for thinking about crypto. And then when we hit another bull market in 16, 17, then I was paying attention, and I was on the spot, and I was more active, and I learned about more stuff. And then when we had another bull market starting in 2020 and 2021, then I was even more educated, even more well positioned, even more networked to take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's that continuous improvement that you speak of, right? Like
Yeah.
it's time in the seat, number of at bats, and then really being cognizant enough to learn along the way. I mean, continuous improvement, I think, is something that you can deploy not only on a daily basis but on a decade timeline, and I think that that's invaluable. It's cool to hear your perspective on it.
The other thing that's core to the strategy, and I'm not saying this works for everybody. In fact, this probably doesn't work for most people, but maybe it works for a lot of people on this call, is I've pursued an investing strategy where I invest a small percentage of my net worth in high risk things that could go up substantially. So there's a lot of risk management here. I'm definitely, across all these things, I'm never risking more than 5% of my balance sheet or something on any one trade, or hopefully not on too many correlated trades. Often a lot less than that on any individual trade. And I know a lot of other people have very different strategies, but I have some very safe money. I have cash. I have enough cash that if everything went to shit, I would be fine. And so, it's definitely this kind of barbell strategy, which is not for everybody.
Well, I think it's prudent, right? Like I initially came into the space in 2016 with what I called my Vegas money, meaning like if it went to zero, it was a lesson to be learned. If it went up, which it did, luckily, then there's an asymmetric risk reward. But it was never enough. Like I've got a wife and kids. It was never enough to put us on the streets. It was enough to like
Right.
have fun, and I think that that's an important aspect of what you're discussing, because a lot of times I've seen it in the space all too often. People are like, moon, baby. And then it does anything but moon, and it rugs, right? And then it's like, oh, like these are life lessons that I think a lot of the younger generation, and maybe even older, are going to be, carrying with them. And I think it's a good thing in the long run. It's really tough. And I'm empathetic to all the losses in the short term.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I have in my mind this potentially fictional person who was working from home during COVID, got some stimulus checks from the government, has saved 40 grand in the bank, and then, is looking at all this NFT activity, is not, exactly an expert on it, right? Because they're busy with their full-time job and they've got small kids, but they're jealous of the money that other people seem to be making in this space. And then they take all of their investment account, and they drain their Vanguard account to buy a Bored Ape for like 40 grand or something, and just like take that kind of risk. And that just like makes me sad, unfortunately. And I look at that scenario and I think like, this is kind of, I'm describing an approach to life where I've spent, my entire career refining my nose for these kind of opportunities, just like looking and learning. And then still, I just bet like small, 1%, sub 1%, and then I've refined 30 years of career to have people to understand how to source and evaluate and do deals, and how to, a network of people that refer really interesting opportunities to me so that I can be presented with stuff with ideas that could be 100x's, which is, why it makes sense to invest, only 0.5% of your net worth in it. And so, I guess people, sometimes people, my friend, I introduced a lot of my friends to NFTs. Most of them are not doing NFTs as a vocation. They just do it for enjoyment or for a little side investing. And they're just like, well, how do you know, okay, you figured this out. You figured out all these trades. How do you know? And I'm like, I don't, and you spend 30 years figuring out how to know, right? Like it's a process, I guess. It's also what I think, Warren Buffett said he was lucky to be born. I'm paraphrasing, but lucky to be born at the time in history when his skills were perfect match for the environment. And I sort of feel the same way. If I took my contacts out, I couldn't see 6 inches in front of me. If I was on the savannah trying to hunt, gazelles, I would be just completely hosed. I don't have any talent for that, but this is, I was just kind of like born to do this. I was interested in shit like this when I was 11 years old, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's for me, and if it's for you, you probably already know it.
I love that, and totally agree with the invest less, but maybe faster than you would. Instead of doing that research, deploy that capital and then do the research. I'm gonna take that lesson with me, and also learn those lessons from each of the iterations. I love that. One thing you've mentioned in the proof interview that we recommend, that was a very good interview, is that you took a year or a year and a half between projects. Do you
Mm.
have a process or a structure to cross those opportunities and to make the most out of those 12, 18 months?
I think I'm mediocre at that. It's been good enough for me, but I wouldn't say I'm great at that. Though it is, you absolutely characterize it correctly. Is that I started the first business, and then when I went out of the management of that and was looking for the next one, it was a full 2 years of looking, and I had good ideas. And the challenge in between that is the challenge in all these discovery periods is not to pursue a mediocre idea or even an above average idea, right? Like for me, my well, I just told you I was born to do something, so let me confess what I wasn't born to do. In my first business, I was a CEO, and I was not born to be a CEO. I was not great at it. I'm pretty lazy. I'm not very good at execution. I don't like to work very hard, um, and so I need to architect for opportunities that work with that. And so my perfect opportunity is something where the idea is so powerfully good that it can win even with mediocre execution. And so I really need to hold out for a really great idea along the way. Um, and so the challenge of that fallow period in between great ideas is to continue to play and explore, be open minded. The way to do that effectively is to, again, surround yourself with people who have good taste in business ideas and investment opportunities and technological platform shifts, people who have good networks and good taste and are also curious. Spend time with those people. There's also people that you might evaluate as not having good taste but being very creative. This would be like GPT-4 or maybe like GPT-3, right? Like, it's great for idea generation. If you ask it to create 10 business ideas or 50 business ideas, it would be enormously creative. If you asked them to tell you which one is the best of them, I'm not sure it would get the right one. And there are people like this in the world who just like they have out of the box minds, right? They think like they're not stuck. They don't immediately go to why this wouldn't work. Like they don't immediately go to the filtering step of like all the reasons this might not work. They can hold in their brain for longer. Well, I guess in my case, I pride my ability to hold in my brain for longer the concept of what might be interesting about this idea instead of what's wrong, and to ignore the like what's wrong with this idea, and like instead of trying to find the reasons a new idea will fail, search for what's disruptively interesting or possible in that idea and kind of nurture that for a while before you kill the idea. And some other people are just good at idea generation. Actually, they're terrible at killing ideas. They could never figure out all the reasons why it's not going to work. And you can keep those guys in your network, those gals in your network too, to generate ideas as long as you're clear on what their value is, which is creativity, which I don't rate myself particularly top on creativity and idea generation. And some people really are just fountains of new ideas. So spending time with those people. So that's the answer to the question of how do you make this time productive? And then what's hard about this time is to wait. Just feeling that this week, because I'm in one of those times right now. I don't have any like really good idea, but I have ideas. I have pretty good ideas, and I've been successful enough that people will tell me the pretty good ideas are really good ideas, or they'll want to give me money to do them, or they'll, or I can do them. And, as I think back to the last fallow period, which was between middle of 2018 or 19 to 2020, 2018 to 2020, it was kind of one of those like searching periods. And, I came up with this thesis, because I'm always coming up with investment thesis. I came up with this thesis that one thing that would be very interesting would be to own an app that is on the homepage of people's phones. I mean, this sounds like a really obvious idea. I'm not going to be able to own the company that owns that app. Now, I'm not going to own Facebook. I'm not going to own. I'm talking own all of a company that is on that. But I wondered about this idea of niche apps that are daily use case applications for some small number of people, and the niche is small enough that in its focused uh, focus on that can retain and deliver a perfect product for those people. And I just felt like over the long haul, if you can be valuable enough people to be on the homepage of their iPhone, and you can really learn from those people and cater to them, invest them, you could build like a good business that you could own. I'm fascinated by this idea of owning stuff that you never sell as opposed to like trades. And I tracked down one of these businesses that is very powerful, but like is only a few employees, but for actually a subset of very wealthy people is, a homepage app for them. And I tried to negotiate to buy it. It seemed like I was going to get it. Didn't happen. And then he said, I'm not going to sell. I think maybe he was never going to sell, but I'm going to cash out like 30% of the business. I'm going to sell it to like 8 people. So I'm going to sell 8 people each like a 4% stake in the business. Do you want to buy it? I'm spending time with it. And luckily I just nuked that whole thing. It was like a giant waste of time. It wasn't my thesis anymore owning it. And anyway, like around that time that I'm blowing that up, 2 of these friends that I really index on and I 100% trust their opinion, both were really hitting me like DeFi, like starting in March 2020. Like you've really got to play with DeFi. Like it's really come of age on the Ethereum ecosystem, and these apps are incredible. And finally in June, I was like, okay, I'm going to spend a week doing it. And I played with it and I was like, holy shit, this is big and I am late. And this is all to say, thank God I didn't get distracted with that other app, because the real opportunity was still coming. And the like pretty good idea, after 2 years of looking, there's a lot of temptation to the pretty good idea. But man, there's so much value in hanging out and holding out for like the really great idea. And it's a luxury, obviously, to be in the position that uh, you can hold out for a couple years and not. I mean, because I see other people, friends of mine, who want to do this. They quit their job and they really want to look for the right thing, but there's a lot of psychological and in some cases financial pressure, and you're just like at everything. I was at a big LP meeting for one of these crypto funds I'm invested in, and everybody's like, "What are you up to?" Everybody's like, "What are you doing?" And like, it is a very unsatisfying answer to be like, "Well, I'm kind of surfing the web these days. Like I've been playing with Chat GPT, like thinking maybe it'll create some ideas. Like this is a very low status way to describe what you're doing. And as humans, at least I find it very hard to, people who have these like jobs and they're like doing interesting things and they're like, what are you doing? And you're like, nothing, honestly. Like I'm kind of doing, well, what looks like nothing to you, so you really got to power through that.
That's worked well for you, though. I mean, meaning
I
you've
agree.
you you're this is something I've always been, listening to the 100 Proof podcast, was the self-awareness that you have, and then leaning into your strengths, and then being able to be comfortable with who you are. Like in those downtimes, I agree. Like it's almost like I need to do something. I need to prove to others. I mean, you had a quote in the podcast about how you wanted others to think you were clever more so than be right. And I
It's one
think
of my
that
biggest investing flaws for sure, I think was the way I characterize it. And I totally agree with that.
and I think that was really it's powerful, like when you're able to exercise that much self-awareness and like really lean into your strengths. And to be honest, it's a really great time for you to say that personally. But when you're talking about, leaning into ideas that aren't just mediocre or even above average, like I think that that's something, um, a lot of people could lean into more, is like when you're emotionally moved or you have this like visceral conviction into things, like being patient enough to pounce on those opportunities is definitely, I think, something that comes with age. And it's really encouraging to hear that from somebody who has executed on a very long timeline and consistently. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, to bring that to NFTs for a minute, probably listeners to this podcast were hoping at some point we would talk about NFTs. And, in that world, as you mentioned, I'm a member of FlamingoDAO, and Flamingo is a collaborative uh, DAO. It's sort of an investment pool of capital where we've agreed to pool together and buy mostly NFTs and in some cases stakes in companies operating in the NFT ecosystem. And it's been very successful and also very fulfilling for me. Like the active members in the DAO are a bunch of really neat people who, speaking of this idea of like clever people who share their insights and open your minds, there are a lot of these people in this DAO for sure. It's been huge, actually, for my NFT experience. It's been absolutely fundamental to my experience in collecting NFTs. And, so we'll have debates now. Like we mostly interact on calls, but mostly, a lot in Discord, and there's an Art Blocks Discord channel, and we'll talk about Art Blocks. And, now, there's some people who have, different ideas that may be right. And we recently had a discussion where they say, well, look at all these Art Blocks projects that are really cheap, right? Project XYZ um, is very high quality, which is true, and the price is very affordable relative to what we think it would be in the long run. Maybe we should collect more. And Flamingo owns a lot of art blocks. I mean, we own an absolute vault full of great art blocks collections, and we have full curated season 1 through 8 set, and lots of things. And I guess I'm at this point now, again, where I'm trying to honor the idea that I don't have a ton of conviction in NFTs. I mean, do I think like some of these things are cheap? I do, but I'm not at the point where I can see the future. I can see that stuff feels cheap. And in some cases, I can have opinions on how things might become valuable again, or which things might become valuable again. But I have no insight as to when they might become valuable again, or significantly more valuable than they are today. Um, I feel like for that to occur, we need new collectors of significant resources to come into the space and not just be trading around money from the same collectors who are already in the space, trying to, it's sort of like the Bitcoin space. And, there's some people in here harvesting and selling, and those are like the miners who are just like constantly creating this like deflationary drag on the total. And then there's some modest number of new dollars coming in, either existing people who bring more of their net worth into the space or a few new people coming. But to have a significant event, and sure, one project can moon, but that's going to happen at the expense on average of everything else in the space. People will sell in order to buy that. and things will turn around when new people get drawn into the space and size. And I think that'll happen. I don't have a theory as to when and how and who those people are. And until I do, it it doesn't make sense from an investment standpoint for me to take positions. And if prices move up 10 or 20 or 30% because that starts to happen and I don't figure it out until a month after it's happened, I still think uh, it's a better bet to wait and then pay 10 or 20 or 30% more when that happens. So I think now is a spectacular time to collect art that you love and you want to own at prices that are attractive. I don't also have a thesis that prices will get a lot more attractive for high quality projects in this space. It feels kind of like things have leveled out a bit. And so given that, it's a great time, and I do collect stuff that I want to own and that I really like. Particularly, I think if you liked kind of mid rares, for example, which there's zero liquidity in, so ultimately you could probably get a lot of people to sell those pretty close to a floor price now. Again, I'm not saying as something that you're going to make money on in the near term or as the highest ROI move, but because you want it in your collection, I think it's a good time.
I know you talk about this is a perfect transition for the ROI discussion because you are probably one of the earliest stackers of for the Chromie Squiggle, the bold type. And
Yep.
I actually first ran into you and it was through your wallet because I was like, who the hell has all of these bolds? And it kept being the name JDH. You've also been pretty public about collecting around some of the hyper variants
Yep.
and trying to, the way I kind of see it is almost like that barbell method of having some that are in that quote unquote alien, to make a
Yep.
CryptoPunk reference. And so to me, it's like you really approach this with like almost a collector's mentality. And you talk about how when the Chromie Squiggle flipped the 1/8 floor price, it almost gave you the conviction that there was momentum behind the collection, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing, but please
Yep.
correct me if I'm wrong.
It's great.
So you collected bolds, you're collecting hypervariants, going through your wallet, there's just a ton of low color spread, beautiful ones. Is there, we'll transition out of life and journey and more into like a squiggle journey, but like, is there
Yeah.
a favorite memory on your squiggle journey so far pertaining to squiggles?
There's so many, but I started minting it. I think I heard about it in the FlamingoDAO. People talking about this project Art Blocks when it was minting, and people were minting squiggles. And I my first mint was not in the first half of the squiggle mint, so I was not early. It was, I don't know what the number was. It might have been 4,000 or maybe 5,000, 6,000, but it's not super early. I was not at the front of the queue, but I got in. I minted a few. I thought it was cool. I minted a few for friends. Gave them away. Like, hey, this is a cool project. You should check this out. You'll recall that squiggles were like what, $40 or something at this time that I was minting plus gas. And I think, as I mentioned on the proof podcast you talk about, I after I minted a handful, I said these are cool. I like them, but I see some of you are minting hundreds of these, and that's real money. Do you just love these things like crazy, or what? Or do you think they'll be valuable someday? Because in my mind, this collection of 10,000 of these squiggles, like, how could that ever appreciate? It's sort of like you might think about friendship bracelets or these, the hearts and crafts or whatever. Like, it's like, it's cool, but I mean, come on, there's 30, 40,000 of them. Like, how is it going to go up? And that's kind of like how I felt about squiggles. And as you alluded to, one of the people in the discussion said, like, I think squiggles could be a 1/8 floor someday. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, I mean, squiggles are nice, but that is never going to happen. But that kind of like changed my mindset a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, again, I don't totally get it, but these guys are smart. And so I'm going to mint some more. But unfortunately, I didn't take it as far as I should have. I don't know how many I minted, but it was 50 or something squiggles. It was not thousands like some of these people did. And then when it started to get towards the end, then we got caught in the mania. I mean, the price had gone up a little bit, and now we're starting to enter like where gas started to be expensive too. But there was this mania around manually minting as we got into the 9,000s. Then at some point, Eric cut it off, before 10,000, and that was kind of a surprise. And so I kind of was maniacally minting at the end. But I guess one thing that stood out is I minted, several just like basic squiggles or slinkies or whatever. And then I minted, but within my first 5 or 10, I minted a hyper slinky. I remember posting that on the Discord. I'm like, is this good? This looks like unusual. And I think Eric was like, oh yeah, that's a good one. I was like, I had no idea, right? Like obviously the odds of minting that and 1 out of 10 or whatever I was at that point is pretty low. So I didn't even know what I had at that point. So I got this collection of squiggles, but then once you started to see the price movement of these things, like went up to like 0.5 and then came down a little bit, and you saw what people were doing, you could kind of see that there was a collector base forming for this. You saw the other drops on art blocks be successful. You saw ringers and you saw things that got pretty collected and people starting to get excited. And then I started to really develop conviction around Squiggles is sort of the emblematic membership token of art blocks at some level, right? As just like people were going to be passionate about this art blocks thing and they're going to want to own one of these. And I remember advocating a Discord group for just a bunch of my IRL friends, again, not like total nerds for this stuff, but people just who were interested in talking about it. And I remember advocating to people this like Squiggle thesis at this point when it had become obvious. I'm like, you guys should be collecting these squiggles. They're like, might be like 0.3 ETH, but I think they could go up a lot, or 0.4 ETH. And people were somewhat skeptical of this. And so I had gotten the bug at some point and had started to collect them. And I started buying bolds. And so you alluded to this bold question. So at some point I looked at the stack of rarities, and I think I'd oversimplified a little bit in thinking about squiggles like punks, where punks trade pretty authentically to their trait rarity, at least in some, certainly to the major types, and with some variety amongst the more desirable attributes. And so I was extending that onto squiggles, and I looked at bolds, with 400 bolds out of 10,000 squiggles. I thought it was like kind of like an almost a zombie. I mean, bolds and pipes were pretty interesting from this regard. And because the zombie and ape punks seemed really interesting to me, and obviously the aliens, I thought by analogy it would be interesting to own a lot of these things. And at this point, I kind of got conviction around squiggles, and bolds were trading at like 0.3 ETH to 0.4 ETH, which at the time was probably like $300, $400. And when I have conviction around things, I'm at a point where I could spend $300 or $400 a lot of times, and lose it. Like that's not that's a gamble I could take just for fun. And so I just started being the floor on bolds. I bought all the bolds for like 0.3 to 0.4, and I would just be a standing bid for bolds if things came out. And I ended up accumulating, I've got like 50 something bolds out of the total of 400. So I've got a good position in the bold ecosystem. And I like bolds. That's the other thing. Like aesthetically, I like the bolds. I think, it's distinctive, but echoing the basic. I just think they're cool. They're like a basic on steroids. And as we've seen, the basic is, very desirable, part of it. And I guess that's, flipping to, I guess, what I got wrong about this trade. And so I was buying bolds up to like mostly a 1E. I bought 0.3 to 1 or 1.5. I bought a few for more than that, but that was kind of my trading window. And then it appreciated out of that window. I kind of stopped accumulating. It was at a point where, when it was thousands of dollars each, it's like, and I owned a lot of them. I was like, and I bought a bunch of them for hundreds of dollars each. I kind of stopped being the backstop of that market. And so, I guess what I got wrong about this from a financial trading perspective is that squiggles haven't mirrored punks exactly in how they've performed. And I was sort of right that people like squiggles as a token of membership within the art blocks community, but they really haven't gravitated to the rares, as a way to flex status above the basics. I mean, the way I sort of imagine this would play out is there'd be lots of people who wanted to own a Squiggle as a token of being part of this community, saying I own a piece of it. And that lots of people would just be happy to own a Squiggle, and then but then people would then want to trade up and have a slightly fancier Squiggle, to have the, who buys a Turbo S 911 Porsche instead of just like a GTS. It's like, do you really use that speed? Like, you're being a lot faster from 120 to 180 miles an hour. Is that really that useful to you? No, it's more like, they kind of want to have the fancier thing, I think, in a lot of cases. And I sort of imagine that would happen more, but it seems to, two things have happened. One is the basic Squiggle has just kind of become iconic. That's like the Squiggle, like it gets so much more advertising, it's always the logo. And so that is like what people see when they see a Squiggle, not like a slinky, is not what they see when they think of a Squiggle. They think of the basic, and then people seem, mostly content just to like to have a Squiggle. They don't seem that motivated to trade up. There doesn't seem to be having a zombie punk is definitely a flex, and definitely a flex that is greater, that says something about you other than having a floor punk, right? But I'm not sure. I don't see people flexing a bold or a pipe Squiggle in the same way, even though it has a similar rarity.
Talking to somebody who flexes a bolt as his PFP. So I have this. I'm very much aligned with probably your original thesis. I think that art has to have a greater adoption for that to happen.
Do you think that thesis will come around and people will start valuing these mid rares more? Because, if I basically could have bought 5 times as many floor. I could have bought 250 floors instead of 50 bolds, basics instead of 50 bolds, and 250 floor basics would be worth multiples of what the bolds are worth. I'm still happy with it. It was a great trade. I'm happy
Yeah,
with it. I'm just saying, it was pure investment mindset. At least if you were to evaluate it now, it was a slightly suboptimal trade.
I think history will prove the floor trade is probably the best given ROI and liquidity. I
Yep,
do think that the bold will have its moment. I think you're starting my operating thesis and mental model right now is that the art market has proven to be fairly resilient relative to maybe some of your PFPs. Obviously, there's outliers like a punk, which is historic and art and a PFP.
totally.
But by and large, I think art has been grasping the attention. You were at Marfa. I think you saw a lot of personalities that weren't natively um, art related that are starting to focus on art. And I think that there's an operating thesis. And when the I think the correlation to a punk is analogous. It's not exact, but I think that there's some sort of congruency there, and over time it showcases it. I mean, I got a bolt because I think they're beautiful too. It was a flex for me within the art community,
Love
and
it.
anybody who's in to Squiggles and art, one of their first comments is always like, "Nice chunker," right? I think you're
Yep.
starting to see, there's the fuzzy fam mentality around
Yeah,
the
Fussy's
fuzzy.
got their own, surely got their own attachment way out of proportion to the other rarity types. Like, people really fell in love with those.
Yeah. And I think that like you'll start to see that like those command a more substantial premium relative to things that might be rarer, like a ribbed. And
Yep,
to me, that's with Nifty wearing a hoodie here. I think that's analogous.
the
Again,
hoodie
not
punk.
directly correlated to like a hoodie punk. Like I
Yeah,
think people are starting to gravitate towards it. It just doesn't have part of this podcast is for awareness, and it doesn't have the stickiness yet of the punk. But I do think that, and this is probably the perfect transition into it. The Squiggle to me is not just a squiggle; it's indicative of art blocks. It's an indicative of its creator, Eric, and I think that on a long enough timeline, Eric wins. 999 times out of 1,000. He's just a very unique individual, and I think we can all rally behind that since he is the creator of the Squiggle. And I guess my thing is like I find Eric to be an incredibly not only intellectual and talented individual. He has foresight like nobody's business. He sees things way in advance, but his passion is something that like resonates deeply with me. He's, in my opinion, he's one of the true advocates for the space. Do you find yourself drawn to any particular trait or anything about Snowfro that you're drawn to more than others?
The calling card that I think makes him such a beloved and broadly successful figure in the space is just his authenticity. Like he's really operating out of an internal uh, view of what NFTs should be and what collecting should be and why this is important and why having impact on the lives of the people in the space is important. Did I do that? We've
You're,
got some visuals going on that I
yeah, I
appear
was
to
gonna
have
say that
generated with my hand movements. Oh
it was
yeah,
such a bold statement
That's
that
true.
fireworks
yeah,
were going
that's
off for Eric.
incredible. Talk about
Yeah,
Eric. And
how
you
do we do
talk
that?
about Eric, and the software creates creates a fireworks show for you. That's incredible. Um, the he's just so authentic, and it's an internally driven thing. And so many people building in the NFT space are doing the rationalist thing of what does the market want? What will people buy? What will people value? And because he is generating from ideas from within, I mean, this is like obviously a bold comparison, but the obvious entrepreneurial analog would be like Steve Jobs or someone. They just like have this vision of uh, what they want to build and what people are going to like. And a lot of those people aren't successful because they're just not right. They have a vision for what the world will want. It's not what the world will want. But in Eric's case, he's turned out to have a vision that works. And what I think we can see empirically here at this kind of bear market moment of fairly low sentiment relative to the peak in sentiment that happened, a year and a half ago, a couple years ago, is that he made the right call. He was never fueling speculation. He had always said, "I'm not here to restrict supply to increase values. I'm here to put a lot of art in the world." He's always focused on the art side. He's not issuing a token, Art Blocks token. He's not monetizing. He's not thinking about any of these things. He's just been thinking about artists and putting out great art. And what's that's meant through this consolidation period where a lot of these people who are just here to make money or here to build, you know, personal capital and awareness and success for themselves, his strategy created authentic things. And at the, even and at the bottom of sentiment that we're at now, Art Blocks has performed just about as well as anything in the market. The people have held and not generally dumped at the same degree as other projects, and people remain loyal fans of the product because people came for genuine reasons of what's being created here.
I totally agree. I think what you were saying, Snowfro, one is here for the right reasons. It's one of the artists that talks more about other artists or other things than his own art, never talking about the floor. And I think Marfa was the proof, attracting the nicest and most genuine people in the space. And the ambience there was a proof of what the Snowfro attracts. So, okay, we have a few minutes left. We want to do some rapid fire questions to end.
Okay, I've been talking too much, so I'll try and keep it tight. Go ahead.
The question is rapid fire. The answer doesn't need to be. First one, any squiggle or grail that got away and the story behind it?
Well, yeah, I would say, I mean, the biggest grail that got away was my original thesis that got me into the Squiggle thing was, wanting to own a zombie. I'm sorry, wanting to own a alien punk. I wanted to own an alien punk
Mm.
when no alien punk. This in January 2021, January of 2021. So no alien had traded for a long time, and I kind of got this thesis that like punks were going to be an absolute grail, and people would want to flex, and the aliens would be the ultimate flex. The project with all this provenance, and so I bid on a number of different aliens trying to wake them up. Nobody done that for a while. You had to actually escrow, cash on individual bids on the old punk contract. And then finally somebody countered my bid of a couple hundred at 800 ETH. And, this is not a mistake I usually make. I countered at 500 and I should have just bought it. I thought it was worth multiples of that. Like it was just bad tactics. And then someone snapped it up for 600 and I was so mad, because I thought it was worth multiples of 600. I couldn't believe I'd lost it over 100 ETH. And then, the next ones to traded at thousands. And even if I thought it was worth more than that, like it was impossible to bring myself to buy it at multiples of what I'd just paid. And, but it turned out that FlamingoDAO had bought it. I didn't even know, I wasn't even in the CryptoPunks channel on Flamingo. I wasn't even in the CryptoPunks Discord. And so I bought, and the shares in FlamingoDAO weren't sold out at that point. I'd originally bought one unit. And so I maxed out my ownership of Flamingo. So at least I got proportionally decent ownership of that, that alien. But that really motivated me to aggressiveness in those early days of NFTs, where I felt like some of these things were super valuable. I was invited to, I'll give you another non-squiggle answer, that I really love that God Mode Fidenza, and that was bought by a coalition of collectors. And I was invited to be in that coalition, and I strongly thought about it because I really love that Fidenza. I love that project. And I'm of mixed mind. I think it was a great investment. I think, economically it would have been a good return. But I value this autonomy of like fully owning things, and then I can decide to sell or change my mind. And being in these cooperative ownership situations, even being in like FlamingoDAO and stuff, it's like being in SquiggleDAO, right? Like, it's you don't have control. You gain some things from the community, but you don't have control. And so those are just trade-offs you have to make. But Squiggles, no, I don't think there's any particular Squiggle that I look back and I'm like, for the most part, as you mentioned earlier, I've collected a number of the hyper variants, and I've been pretty aggressive about those. When those came on the market at a price that I thought was reasonable, I just sort of jumped on that.
I think you have an amazing Squiggle collection, so you are pretty covered. What we see two Tom Sachs rockets on your background. What other pieces, NFTs or non-NFTs, or three, sorry, what other NFTs or pieces of art are hanging on your walls?
Yeah, so you've got, just to tour a little bit, you've got three of the Tom Sachs rockets. I just love his sensibility, his whimsy, his humor, his creativity. And so this project, to me, is incredible. I didn't know his stuff before NFTs. I got into Tom Sachs via NFTs, and I'm glad I did. On my display here, that's a cargo. That's Kim Assendorf project. I owned several, and then at Marfa, the recent gathering in Marfa that we were at, this was on display at the Art Blocks house, and I just loved it. I loved it on a big display, and I guess I'd never really spent time with mine on a large display. And I went and I bought some more cargos, and I've started spending more time with them, and it made me want to take one of these and find a way to display it. I'm going to risk it here, and you see a big ringer. So ringers is one of my big collections.
Wow.
And so, can you see that okay? Oh, yeah. So you can see on the other side of the room. So that was me figuring out how to display one of my ringers. And it's there's a local fabricator who works with a lot of top artists, non-NFT artists, in fabricating their stuff. And we work together. They have a giant 8-foot square printer, inkjet printer that can print on anything that's flat up to 8 by 10 maybe, if it's less than 1.5 inches thick. And we took a 5-foot square piece of hardwood plywood, and Dimitri rendered this ringer with a transparent background so we could let the plywood grain show through. And then we went and printed this ringer on this giant piece of plywood, and it's one of my favorite things. It looks really cool. So I've got a number of art blocks displayed like this. I've got one of my Fidenzas printed very large, and then I guess maybe my favorite of my art blocks renderings is I have a collection of 49 ringers. At the moment, I actually have 50 ringers because I couldn't bear to see one sit on the floor. But I have a core collection of 49 ringers that's sort of, I think, a permanent hold for me. And I have it printed in a 7-foot square grid. And that's printed about, yay big. And it's just endlessly fascinating to look at that. Just the ringers in the grid format is just really compelling. I haven't figured out how to make the most of my squiggles. You can you see these back here? I can't see in my angle, but there's a couple of infinite object squiggles back here. And I do like it. I enjoy having the squiggles here, but I haven't figured out how to, really present the squiggles in a way that's super compelling for me with like size and presence. So that's still TBD.
We need to work on that. Last question. You've had tremendous success, as we were saying before, like success in the two companies, early to Bitcoin, success with DeFi, with NFTs. What motivates you to continue? Because you are now, again, trying to look for the next idea or opportunity. What motivates you to continue?
Oh gosh, this is not a rapid fire question. It's, I've really tried to I've been on a journey really the last 8 years after I started meditating seriously. I've become a serious meditator over the last 8 years, and I've done a number of other things to improve my self-awareness. And so I feel like my self-awareness and my ability to be present in the moment and really experience what's going on in an authentic and true way for me has increased dramatically over the last 8 years, and which is a blessing and a curse, both in some regards. And so, to what's implied in the question, I guess one of the things is, a lot of, as I said at the very top of the podcast, what motivated me coming out of my childhood was I wanted this freedom, this independence, and that motivated me to want to be an entrepreneur as a channel to, number one, having full discretion in my work life and not be told what to do, but number two, making some money and, gaining the freedom and independence that would provide. And, in this question, you acknowledge the diminishing returns to that. Once you've gained a certain amount of money and gained a certain amount of independence, more money doesn't necessarily buy you more. And so, it's an issue for me a little bit because, I talked all about the positive side of spending 30 years honing these instincts, right? Like, I really feel like I am good at evaluating businesses, evaluating investment opportunities, evaluating, opportunities. I guess the curse of it is, if you, to what end, at some point. And so to some extent, I just enjoy doing this stuff. So I just keep doing it because I like being curious. I like being on the edge of things. I like, sharing new ideas, always. I like opening up people's minds with new ideas. You guys are probably familiar with the collector Cosimo de Medici. I was at a event he hosted at his house, and there were a number of top collectors, some of who've been on this podcast, and artists at this event. Whatever, some period of time, I don't remember how long ago, a year ago, more than a year ago. And, I was demoing Midjourney and AI art to these guys. And, 80% of them had never used Midjourney, had never created a piece of AI art, even though they were top collectors in the space. And people still come to me and say like, oh, that was really interesting to me. And, it was back to my classic, like, figuring out something's important, somewhere between 1 week and 6 months before everybody knows it's important. I'm not saying I was like super early on the curve, but I was earlier than a lot of these top people by just a matter of weeks in that case. I love that experience. I love opening people's minds like that. So I do still enjoy that, but I do also wonder, I guess that the issue I find is, as I've refined this, I enjoy collecting and investing in projects in the NFT space and outside the NFT space. I enjoy collecting the art, both because I like the art and, these cargos. I told you I bought more cargos at Marfa. It wasn't because I think I'm going to make a ton of money. I mean, maybe, but that was zero of my motivation. I just wanted to own a few more of them. I like them, but I do sometimes wonder to to what end am I doing this other than just this this sort of hedonistic desire that I just enjoy doing it. And I wonder if I should do something, if I should find, I wonder if I should find something else to do that is more generative in some way, or maybe building something or whatever. But then at other times I'll think I'm here on this earth to be kind to people, make the most of it, enjoy my time here, and I'm doing that. So maybe I can just be happy with that. So anyway, I won't go further down this rabbit hole, but it is I think it's a really prescient question of to what end, and my only answer can be that I'm just putting one foot in front of the other each day, and to this point, doing more of this and geeking out on it is fun for me, so I'm still doing it.
I love that. Lots of lessons. And for me, one is to find the time to tinker more. As you were saying, you were early to the Mid Journey and AI art for a few weeks. I think we were all hearing about that, and just a few people were really tinkering with that. So that's one of the lessons that I'm taking with me. Any closing remarks that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and I appreciate what you guys are doing for the cause of Squiggles. I think we can give Snowfro the lion's share of the credit for what Artblocks has created, what Squiggles have created, all the benefits of this community. But he's backed by a whole team he's assembled of people who are very hardworking, and also, I think for the most part, very intrinsically motivated and have been very consequential. So let's not pretend that it's just all Eric driving that. And then, we've got guys like you guys who have identified the importance of these works, of certain works of art generally in people's lives, and realize that it doesn't succeed just because people have it sitting in a vault, but because they're advocates and educators, and more, this can only thrive if more people are brought into the fold. And so, I appreciate you guys for the work you're doing on behalf of all of us.
Thank you so much. We had the opportunity to meet some of the Artblocks team in Marfa, and they are truly exceptional. So lots of the credit is them. JDH, we cannot thank you enough for your time, for all the gems and lessons that you've shared with us. Truly a special episode. Everyone in the audience, please follow JDH on Twitter at JDH. Follow SquiggleDAO.
You can follow me. I'm on a Twitter break. Who knows if I'll ever come back. So follow me, but you might not get any content, or maybe you will.
Follow SquiggleDAO. Join our Discord. There are some sections that are only for DAO members, but 90% of the DAO and the Discord is open, and we are very welcoming, so feel free to join. And that's everything from us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional or financial advice. The hosts and guests are not licensed financial advisors, accountants, or lawyers. The content is based on personal experiences, opinions, and research, and its accuracy, completeness, and timeliness cannot be guaranteed.